All right, welcome to this Departmental Showcase for Virtual Learning Series hosted by the Federal Youth Network. My name is Laquan, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm here on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and I encourage all of you to acknowledge the land you're on as well. Feel free to do so in the chat. As we move through today's session, please share your comments in the chat space and questions by using the Q&A button in the language of your choice. You can vote for questions you like by clicking on the thumbs up button, and we'll push the most thumbs up question to the top to answer by my colleagues on the chat. Cette session, Ministère, sous le projecteur et votre bilan, c'était vous à l'aise de poser vos questions dans la langue de votre choix. Nous sommes chanceux d'accueillir Transport Canada aujourd'hui. Sans plus tarder, je vais passer la parole à Norman et Justin, les modérateurs de cette session.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nerman Hasanova. I'll be moderating the session along with my colleague Justin Bernard. Just to give everybody kind of a sense of our timeline for this session, we'll just give a quick intro to ourselves. We'll introduce our panelists, Frank, Paula, and Jimmy. They'll talk about, give a little introduction to themselves, just some departments they've worked in, some files they worked in within TC as well. And then we'll jump into some Q&As with our panelists. And then we'll dedicate the end portion of the session to a Q&A from the audience. So feel free to make sure you're entering your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat. Make sure you do vote which questions are that you want answered first. So we'll go through it in that order. Yeah, I hope you enjoy the session. I know it's recorded on YouTube as well. So if you want to share it afterwards to any of your friends, feel free. Yeah, I think we can get started. So to introduce myself, Nerman, I've been with the department for close to 2 years now. Or close to 2.5 years, I would say. So I started as, I was bridged into the government. That's one thing that I'll flag as well to anybody that's kind of new to the government, don't know how to, get your foot in the door. I got through, it's called student bridging. I'll add the link in the chat as well. I know there is some, I don't want to say misleading information, but I think there's a thought that you need to go through an FSWEP or a co-op program in order for bridging to work. But if you read through that website, you can see if you have any experience with the public service, you can be bridged. So I'll share that in the chat. But so I'm a policy analyst for Transport Canada. I started with, there's a Crown Corporations team. So I started working for Via Rail, which was the first Crown Corporation that I worked for. And then moved over to a second Crown that was newly incorporated. That's Via HFR. And then now I'm working on a file called the Oceans Protection Plan. So I'll give the floor to Justin to introduce himself as well. Go ahead, Justin.
Bonjour tout le monde. Mon nom, c'est Justin Bernard. J'ai commencé en 2017 pour Transport Canada. Je travaille aux affaires parlementaires et j'ai commencé comme un étudiant à travers du programme fédéral d'expérience de étudiant. En anglais, c'est FSWEP, Federal Student Work Experience Program. Et ensuite, j'ai reçu une permanence et je suis avec l'équipe des affaires parlementaires depuis ce jour. J'ai travaillé sur plusieurs différents dossiers. J'ai travaillé sur des comités, des questions des députés, des rapports de comités. il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on fait des affaires parlementaires qui est très intéressant. Mais sans plus tarder, je vais laisser nos présenteurs se présenter. So, si on veut commencer avec Frank.
Sure. Thank you, Justin. Merci, and it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to everyone. I'm Frank Standardo, currently on an interchange, in fact, with the newest Crown Corporation at the Government of Canada via HFR, High Frequency Rail, via TGF. I started in government in the 2000, so quite a long time ago. As I came through one of the recruitment processes that the government had at the time, which was a management training program. And I know they don't necessarily have the same programs out there, but I did look today and they do still have postgraduate recruitment programs. And so that's one other way of getting into the government. I came in and started in trade negotiations with Transport Canada. I was sent off right away to Geneva for a couple of weeks to see how world trade negotiations work, which was quite an eye-opener. Stayed there for a year. My program allowed me to do 4 assignments in 4 years. So I also went to the Privy Council. I did a stint with Safety and Security at Transport Canada after 9/11 and the Immigration and Refugee Board before coming back to Transport to kind of be a more permanent self, and did trade negotiations with the European Union, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and a number of others for about 11 years before, in 2017, heading off to Canada's embassy in Washington, D.C. to be the transport counselor there during quite a interesting time with the Trump, followed by Biden administration and COVID and the closure of the borders and so on. Returned a few months ago. In fact, Jimmy on the line here helped me transition back to Transport Canada and do a short stint in the Deputy Minister's office to see, again, how the department functions. And in the last 3 or 4 months, I started interchange with via HFR to be their acting corporate secretary. So completely different skill set from my previous experiences, which were mostly policy, to work more on the administrative side and manage board of directors as we start up this new organization. Thank you.
And Paula, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Paula Trackey. I, like Frank, came in through the management trainee program, which probably seems a bit disappointing to all of you to listen to now and realize that it's no longer around. But prior to that, I came in 2006, and prior to that, you might see in the back, I was obviously in the military, and then came into the Public Service of Canada. I've been in since 2006, and I've moved around a little bit more than Frank. I've worked for Transport Canada. I've worked for Veterans Affairs Canada, Public Services and Procurement Canada, and the Parole Board. And in 2021, I came back to Transport, a nice little department that's well run and with a very interesting and broad mandate. So if you're looking to get into the government, and I'm assuming that you are, rest assured that if you start with one department, you don't have to remain with that department. And that the skills that you acquire in any department usually are transferable. So just keep a bit of an open mind when you're applying. And we can talk a little bit more later about tips and tricks that you want to think about as you're applying in order to keep your resumes more interesting if you don't have the student bridging option. Norman, I can't remember what else I was supposed to say. Sorry.
No, that's pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, just that's really good. Just an overview of your career, which you mentioned, and then we'll, like Paula said, we'll get into some other Q&As afterwards, talk about some tricks for new public servants. Jimmy, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, and hi everyone. I see that we've got almost 600 people that are attending. So that's fantastic. Donc, bonjour à tout le monde. J'ai commencé ma carrière comme un étudiant avec juste un contrat à travers une compagnie d'agence, une agence essentiellement, quand j'avais 16 ans à Défense nationale en 1996. C'est que ça va vous donner une idée de comment vieux que je suis rendu. Et j'ai travaillé à Défense nationale dans la bibliothèque de la division de la recherche jusqu'en 2001. Donc, j'ai pu vivre de belles expériences à Défense nationale, incluant tout ce qui s'est passé autour du 11 septembre 2001. Donc, ça a été vraiment, comme plusieurs personnes, une journée qui m'a marqué, non seulement personnellement, mais aussi professionnellement. Et really put in evidence, my desire to work in the public service and to expand my career and serve the public as best I possibly could. After a bit of a break, I joined Transport Canada in 2002 as an admin, again through an agency. So, as we will be talking, there's multiple paths to get through your career, and I'll never forget our former deputy minister, Louis Ranger, who said, he basically started his career from the mailroom and made his way all the way up as deputy minister. There are multiple paths that can lead you to wherever you want to go, and mine took me through the admin route. So as a placement from an agency, I joined Transport Canada, joined a team that I was forewarned by the agency had a very difficult director and DG, and nobody was lasting more than a few days. And I managed to work it through the remainder of the contract, which was only a week and a half, but I did survive. And then got hired at Transport Canada and was an admin for the first year here until I was picked up by Parliamentary Affairs. So you kind of note, that there are some connections amongst all of us here. So joined as an advisor in Parliamentary Affairs and did that for 5-6 years. Really honed my craft in terms of procedures in Parliament. Parliamentary Affairs is something that you either love or hate. And I absolutely loved it. It really gave me a broad overview of how the department, but also the government functions. And that's super important in your career. After that, I joined DMO for what was the Deputy Minister's Office for what was the first of 2 stints in the Deputy's Office. So from 2008 to 2010, I was the Departmental Liaison. So basically the person who is the funnel of information to and from the Minister's Office. So between the exempt staff to the public service. Fascinating times as we were in a new conservative government, under a new conservative government who were trying to get their feet under them in terms of governance and issues management. So that was fascinating. I then went over to infrastructure for 2 years as Chief of Parliamentary and Cabinet Affairs, but before returning to Transport Canada as the Chief of Parliamentary Affairs for a few years. At which time I then got picked up again by the Deputy Minister's Office and have remained within the Executive Office ever since. So I did 2 years as the Director of Issues for the Deputy Minister, which is basically a 24/7 role in the management of any crises and issues that may arise. Being Transport Canada, it's a department for which you never know when something may go bump in the night. And so the need to be at the ready and to have good systems is paramount to be able to effectively support decision-making processes and the experts in doing what they need to do. After 2 years of doing that, I switched over as the Director of Strategic Services. So basically all the corporate needs of the Deputy Minister and the Minister were handled by me before then getting over as Chief of Staff to the Deputy Minister over the course of the pandemic. So I like to think of myself as the wartime Chief of Staff during the pandemic, trying to make sure that all the systems were functioning and all the authorities were being respected as we were navigating what was really an unprecedented event in Canadian history and in world history. So I did that for a couple of years before now switching over and becoming the corporate secretary, again, reporting directly to the Deputy Minister, but highly focused on certain functions like Parliamentary and Cabinet Affairs, the correspondence process, all the internal communications aspects of the work of the department, and all corporate functions that support both the deputy and the minister. So that's a bit of a timeline, 25 years officially in the government of Canada, and have loved almost every minute of it.
All right. And before we get started with the questions, we do have a transition website that was proactively disclosed. I will share it in both languages, dans les deux langues officielles, and you can take a look at that if there's anything that piques your interest during the conversation. Vous pouvez aller voir le caractère de transition qu'on a fait pour notre sous-ministre. Et ouais, il y a les deux liens dans le chat. Both links, English and French, are in the chat now. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nerman, who can ask our first question.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Those links are very helpful. There's so many links within, so there's tons to explore. Before getting into the Q&As, I'm noticing some questions in the chat. Please make sure you're asking it in the Q&A box, not the chat box. And unfortunately, those are the only ones that we'll be looking at because there's the voting structure happening there. So make sure if you have any questions, ask them in the Q&A. So to start, and I really appreciate that our panelists mentioned, all the different experiences they've had within government, not just specific to Transport Canada. And it's never looked bad upon if, you're switching around. If anything, it's applauded. It's a good thing to build so many different skills. Even just for myself, like I've been only working for less than 3 years and I've moved around, and each one I've learned so many different things, and it's always been encouraged by my managers. But to get started, as you know, this is a departmental showcase for Transport Canada. So hopefully we can give you an understanding of how TC works and why our panelists are working for Transport Canada. So that brings us to our first question to Frank. So Justin also gave an overview of TC, but tell us, Frank, what has drawn you to Transport Canada initially, just when you first started into government? What's made you stay with the department? And then also, I know this is a mouthful, but how do you think it differs from the other departments that you've worked for?
Thank you, Nerman. I don't want to disparage any other departments, but like Paula said, I do find transport to be a very well-run department. What drew me into government really is because I graduated from university with an engineering degree, and then went back for a poli-sci and finally a master's of management organizational behavior abroad. And I worked a little bit in engineering, IBM and an aerospace company, and then in management consulting. But I was still looking for something that was just meaningful to me. And so when I joined government, I went through 3 or 4 recruitment processes. So to be a foreign service officer, to be a CETA development officer, counselor officer, and management trainee. And I chose the management trainee route because transport in particular just appealed to me. No matter what, I think Paula mentioned, the mandate of the department is very broad. And just in my experiences, whether you look, the 4 pillars that we typically look at are, maintain a safe, secure, environmentally and economically sustainable transportation system for Canadians. From 9/11 led to the kind of beginning of CATSA as an agency, and a lot of work went on in the department at that point. From a safety perspective, more recently, we had the Iran incident with the PS752 airline, which led to our minister at the time developing and starting an initiative called Safer Skies, which hopefully tries to avoid those kinds of situations happening ever again. We, from an environmental standpoint, we're moving towards electric vehicles. We're looking at electrification of the transportation system. The interchange I'm now doing with VHFR is looking at doing 1,000 kilometers of dedicated track that'll be electrified. And then from a kind of an economic sustainability perspective, we had when the border closed. I mean, how do we keep trucks and truckers being able to move across that border during the pandemic? We had to shut down cruising, which really pissed off my colleagues in the United States, and dealing with that to try to maintain those relationships. Kind of a combination of those was the floods in British Columbia a couple of years ago, which cut off transportation routes in Canada, rail and road, between the southern mainland and the rest of Canada. So working with colleagues in transport and other departments to get the US to provide waivers to allow truckers to kind of bypass that area through the United States and back into Canada. And finally, where I spent much of my time was trade negotiations. And Transport Canada is one of the, I think it may be the second largest regulatory department in the government. And that means we are there to develop a lot of regulations, hopefully to improve the lives of Canadians and the transportation system and make it safer. And trying to make sure that our trade negotiations don't give away that flexibility to do that is important. So for me, those challenges have been what kept me at Transport, and the opportunities to work with great people. If we hadn't, Jimmy mentioned, there's never or hardly ever a day he doesn't love coming into work. That's the same thing I've said for 20 some odd years. Maybe count on my hand the number of days I really haven't wanted to go into the office, but otherwise really love it. I'm passionate about it. I think we're making difference for Canadians. And if you do get tired of one area or another, there's just many other areas in the department that I'm sure someone would find really appealing and important. So kind of in the short end, that's why I've stayed most of my career at Transport. But and you mentioned what's the difference with other departments. It's not that there are good things at other departments as well. Quand j'ai travaillé au conseil privé, l'architecture du Ministère était très flat. It was a very flat organization. And so even as a junior officer, I was permitted to go to the equivalent of the deputy minister's office and say, I need to speak to the deputy. And they say, okay, how many minutes do you need? I need 5 minutes. Go in and speak to them. Because it was trusted that I would not be going to the deputy minister if I didn't really need to. And that's a really nice thing that other departments don't have, because the Privy Council is smaller than other departments. So there's a more hierarchical architecture with many other departments. But Transport from early on has allowed me many opportunities through trade negotiations to brief the deputy minister and Jimmy on occasion, deputy minister's office, the minister's office, the minister. And when I was in Washington, D.C., ample opportunity to facilitate the visits and calls of the minister and deputy ministers and their interactions with their counterparts in the United States, such as Secretary Buttigieg, which most people would have heard of. That kind of feeling like your work means something, I find in ample quantities at Transport Canada.
Perfect. I really like that you point out the people aspect, Frank, because just like some of you in the chat, I was a student as well, and I did an internship with the Canadian Embassy. Just before starting, that's one thing that Frank always pointed out to me as well, that like the people, like Transport Canada is really known for the people, and I've really noticed it as well. Just working through, same thing with the hierarchies, like really have had a good time with like really good mentors with all the managers that I've had. You can just see like a sense of kind of humanity, if I can say. And then as well, like you really, like our panelists pointed out, there's, you can really just move around different jobs. I was going to say something else, but sorry, lost my train of thought. I'll just get to our second question for now. And if I remember, I'll go back. Oh, also, I remember. So we were going to go back to our panelists and see if anybody else wants to touch on the questions that we're asking each panelist as well. We'll play it by ear. We'll see how long we have with the timing. We'll go back to the questions, but for now, we'll just go to the second question. So our second question is to Paula. So you've been a manager for Transport Canada. You've been a really good one. I've had the chance to work with you as well. Give us some advice to public servants. What do you think is a good way for them to start? What advice would you have for them starting off? Imagine yourself kind of first year new grad starting into the job.
Thanks, Norman. It was very nice working with you too. So I enjoyed that. So the thing that I would say is when you start in the public service, it's a little bit broad and it's a little bit overwhelming, and it's very easy to think, I'm going to walk in and I want to be X position in my career. But as you've heard from Jimmy and also from me on some level, sometimes you walk in as an admin, and there's absolutely a whole lot of value that can be gained from that experience as well. So when you come into the public service, whatever job it is that you're doing, you want to take the time to fully understand the job and to respect the work that you're doing, because what managers are looking for as you develop and as you're undertaking your work are people who are committed to doing a good job. And so if you're doing a good job, regardless of where you're sitting, there's going to be a greater incentive to develop you. So that would be the number one thing. Remember, there is absolutely no such thing as work that is beneath your education level. It is just all work that needs to be done. So that's probably the first thing. The second thing is really have an open mind. When I first joined, I joined as an MTP and then, or management trainee program person, and I joined in HR, and I thought, okay, I'm going to spend my life working in labor relations because I think that would be super interesting. Within like 2 or 3 years, I was off to Veterans Affairs and I was negotiating arrangements with providers on funding of health services to people excluded from the Canada Health Act. And then 2 years later from that, I was working in international industrial security, negotiating bilateral arrangements with foreign governments. And then after that, I went in and did appointments. You're going to change in your jobs, and skill sets that you may think don't immediately relate to where you want to be will actually eventually lead you to a spot where you're going to fit. So be very open to those experiences when they come. And then the last thing is, as Frank mentioned, team makes a huge difference, and the people where you work makes a huge difference. So if you're a new public servant and you're in your first career and you're thinking about, changing jobs, it's okay to ask the manager to talk to their team, to talk to their staff, because you really want to know who you're working for. So when you're thinking about changing jobs, you want to think about finding interesting work, good teams, and supportive managers. And without coming off as arrogant, you have due diligence to do as well to make sure that you're finding that manager that fits with you. And so go ahead and ask them, do you mind if I talk to the people that report to you? Can I talk to other members on your team? And that'll give you a really good sense of, is this going to be a good team that I'm going to fit with? Am I going to be happy working here? And does the manager have the same ideas that I do about, my career and where I want to go? So I think as a new public servant, those would be my suggestions. There's no such thing as work that's beneath you. It's all work that needs to be done. Be really open about taking on new experiences and be comfortable trying to understand the environment where you're going to go, because it's 8 hours a day and you want to be in a spot where you can learn.
Thank you so much, Paula. we do have some time as well, so we can go through our other panelists, Frank and Jimmy, to also touch on maybe some advice you can give to the audience. I'll also add that I think doing internships for sure, just maybe this is from personal experience, but it's a really good way to not just find out like what you like, because you can definitely work on it, you know, the first project you get into government for, and like you figure out like this is for sure not something that you want to work with. And that's, I think, a really good thing to find out about as well. Like, for example, for me, like my first internship was with trade negotiations, and sorry, Frank, but it was just like not for me, you know, like I just really didn't like trade. The Department of Commerce, it was for the US government. But so for me, that was a really good experience to like eliminate that for maybe I will enjoy it down the line, but it was a good way to, you know, check it off my list. And I know for sure this is not something I like. So maybe also don't go into internships thinking like you're going to find, you know, where you want to work for the rest of your life as your first job. But I'll open up the floor to Frank and Jimmy. Maybe Jimmy, if you would like to start, maybe some advice that you would also want to give some new grads or current students.
Sure. I just to encourage, you know, Paula said it really well, like that there's no activity, there's no ask that is below you or above you. And I think it's really important that people come in with an open mind and be very inquisitive and reach out. One of the big things that, you know, we've heard constantly throughout the pandemic and even coming out of the pandemic is particularly from the youth in government about how difficult it was to network and how difficult it was to be able to have those social connections. And I'm not, you know, sitting here today saying that we need to go back to a 5-day-a-week model, but we are in a place now where we have a hybrid system that offers the best of both worlds. It gives you the opportunity to really dive in at home in terms of, or wherever you end up doing your work, dive into topics and doing research and reading yourself up on a variety of issues that impact your team. But then when you're in the office, it's your opportunity to really connect with colleagues and your peers and really don't be afraid to reach out to different people around you. It's how all of us got to the places that we are here today. Take a look at Frank and Paula. They were part of an actual program that probably provided some parameters and some venues to be able to exchange and have conversations about different things. That networking requirement or it's so valuable. It's so valuable. And so you're trying to learn a job, but learning a job also means learning how that fits into the broader work of not only your department, your organization, but also within the government. And so be inquisitive, look for training opportunities. The Canada School of Public Service has great training offers that they have, and most of them are free. So really try to get as much information. What I tell my staff all the time is that you want, as you move up through your career, you want to basically have all the tools in your tool belt to be able to continue to grow and to be able to expand and to be able to continue to really contribute, provide some value added, no matter where you end up going. Like Paul was saying, it doesn't really matter where you're at. You know, I always compare it to, you know, buying a new home. You can change the paint, you can change, you know, you can change the fixtures, you can change the mirrors and all that, the doors. Build a good foundation for your career. And then as you continue to move forward, you can then focus on the different pieces that you want to expand on and really want to embellish so that you're able to continue to grow into a direction that really suits you.
There's only maybe one thing I could add to what Jimmy and Paula have indicated, and it's the government often has either they're different kinds of teams. Maybe some ways are called tiger teams, where a certain issue pops up and it's very important. They got to deal with it quickly, and they're looking for volunteers to kind of come in and work for a couple months, a few months. Probably more recently, it would have been something to do with COVID. That would have been a longer kind of tiger team, but there might be special initiatives. They don't have to be tiger teams that are done on top of the work that you're doing for the government. And taking advantage of those opportunities to work in those areas, I found for me, offers you a lot of networking opportunities, as Jimmy mentioned. Being able to see how another part of the organization works. And one of the best decisions I made coming back to the department in 2005 was to take on a special project for the Assistant Deputy Minister. No one else wanted, so it was in some cases a little bit afraid to do, but wanted to do a review of the entire policy function in transport, which was about 300 or 400 people. And it linked a little bit to my master's degree, so I said, sure, I'll do it. It allowed me to manage a team. It allowed me to go and meet all the executives in the department, all the way up to the minister. And I wouldn't have had that opportunity. That allowed me an understanding of Transport Canada, its mandate, what the different groups do, that I otherwise would not have had. And those contacts, everything else that benefited me throughout my career, because when I needed to go find information somewhere else in the department, I knew someone in that area that I could speak to and not have it look like a cold call. And so a lot of people do that, and I just thought that was the one other way, once you get in, to take advantage of it if it's offered to you. Thank you.
If I may just add something, Norman, very, very quickly, because I think we're Paula, Frank, and myself, we're how to basically learn your job and do that kind of stuff. But then there's also an interesting question in the QA, if you don't mind, that kind of ties into it, which speaks to, what advice do you have for public servants looking for career progression, supervisor, managerial? And I think that, everything that we said here, if you lay that right foundation when you first come in and learn your job, but take the time to be able to learn everything around you, I think that sets you up well. But I would argue there's two other things that people should be considering doing. One is more and more departments have champions on different aspects, and particularly social aspects, whether it's diversity, inclusion, accessibility, etc. Looking for opportunities to participate in those kinds of tables and being a participant or a member, and having a say in terms of how a department continues to grow, I think is one thing that it's those intangibles. It's those things that a hiring manager will always look at and see as somebody who's engaged and that actually truly cares. So I think that would be one thing. The second thing that I would say, and I can't stress this enough, on the Treasury Board website, there's a piece of it that speaks to the key leadership competencies. And that page is, my friends, one of the more important pages that you should bookmark throughout your career. It truly gives you a map of the competencies that are required at every single level, whether you're an employee, a supervisor, a manager, a director, an executive director, a DG, heck, even up to a deputy head, a deputy minister of a department. It shows exactly what you're supposed to be able to do. And I think that it's really important, if you have designs on continue to progress your career and advancing through the ranks, it doesn't necessarily have to be in a specific location, but making sure that you're gaining the experiences that meet those key leadership competencies, so that when you do go into a competition or you do have conversations with different leaders, you're able to demonstrate fairly comfortably how you are able to demonstrate those abilities that you've developed through your career. So it's very simple to find on Google. Maybe Justin will find it and put it in the chat. But all that to say that it's one of the most helpful tools that I always speak to my staff about. And quite frankly, since it showed up on the website, has been one of my bookmarks as well in prep for the different moves that I've made throughout my career.
Parfait. Et on va aller à notre dernière question. Celle-ci est pour Jimmy. Depuis la pandémie, il y a beaucoup d'employés qui ont ressenti des stress en ce qui concerne leur charge de travail. Est-ce que tu as des conseils pour des jeunes professionnels qui font face à ce défi?
Oui, et je comprends tout à fait. Ayant été chef de cabinet du sous-ministre pendant la pandémie, c'est venu avec des très grands défis, non seulement côté professionnel dans la gestion des dossiers puis la gestion des processus ministériels, mais aussi sur mon bien-être et trouver une manière de pouvoir gérer l'entier de qu'est-ce qui se passait. Puis une des préoccupations que j'avais pendant la pandémie, c'était que maintenant, le système s'habitue au fait qu'on est capable de produire à une vitesse qui est beaucoup plus accélérée que normale. Et comment que la fonction publique était pour faire essentiellement le pivot pour pouvoir s'ajuster. Le système n'a pas fait un pivot. Au lieu, il y a eu une continuation, peut-être pas une accélération, mais il y a eu, je pense que pour la majorité, ça a été maintenu en termes de la vitesse dans laquelle les décisions devaient être prises puis comment les actions devaient suivre. Il y a plusieurs choses qui peuvent aider. Je ne suis pas je suis pas un life coach, je ne suis pas un thérapeute ou quoi que ce soit, mais de mon expérience, le plus important, c'est de mettre tes paramètres sur qu'est-ce que tu es capable de faire, qu'est-ce que tu es capable de produire. Comme jeune professionnel, c'est clair que vous devez balancer essentiellement votre désir de progresser avec aussi votre bien-être. Et ça, c'est quelque chose que aussi important que tout le travail que vous faites et toute l'éducation que vous faites pour progresser dans votre carrière, c'est de développer cette habileté-là de pouvoir vraiment vous gérer. C'est quelque chose qui va vous servir tellement bien en progressant parce que la charge de travail, le plus que vous avancez, ne diminue pas typiquement. La charge de travail fait juste s'accroître. Donc, c'est quoi vos paramètres? Ça n'a pas besoin d'être, d'aller voir votre superviseur, votre gestionnaire et de dire non, je ne fais pas le travail, je suis épuisé, puis ça ne se fera pas. C'est plus, c'est quoi les éléments que vous contrôlez et comment est-ce que vous pouvez vous gérer de manière efficacement pour pouvoir rattraper votre souffle. Plusieurs jeunes professionnels hésitent de prendre des congés parce qu'ils veulent tout faire ou ils ne veulent pas manquer de temps. Prendre des congés, c'est hyper important. Prendre des pauses pendant vos journées, c'est hyper important. Et avoir essentiellement une relation honnête avec votre gestion est critique. La communication est critique. Si vous recevez à pu arrêter des demandes de différentes choses, c'est important de pouvoir mettre votre main dans les airs et dire à votre gestionnaire je suis capable, je suis rendu où est-ce que je suis à bout, puis vraiment, là, autre que travailler 7 jours semaine, 16 heures par jour, je ne pourrais pas fournir et ça va avoir un impact. Avoir une conversation honnête, c'est hyper important. Et si vous êtes dans une équipe où est-ce que vous vous sentez où est-ce que vous ne pouvez pas avoir cette conversation-là, ça retouche à une des questions. Quand est-ce que vous savez c'est le temps de faire un changement de carrière? C'est peut-être un des premiers signes. Il y a une grande emphase présentement qui est mise sur la santé mentale et sur le bien-être des employés. Et c'est quelque chose qui est vraiment qu'on tient très à cœur ici à Transport Canada dans la gestion des différentes choses. Et maintenant, depuis l'arrivée d'un nouveau sous-ministre, c'est vraiment une très grande priorité de reprioriser essentiellement le travail du ministère. Ça prend du temps. Puis on est tellement habitué de rouler à un certain rythme, ça peut être difficile. Mais il n'y a rien de mal de pouvoir dire, écoutez, moi j'ai besoin d'une soirée ce soir où est-ce que j'ai rien. J'ai besoin de me remettre, de mettre vos paramètres sur qu'est-ce que vous êtes confortable de faire. L'autre chose aussi, c'est de ne pas vous comparer aux autres. Il y a certaines personnes là, où est-ce que ça pète le feu, ils veulent produire à 100% parce qu'ils veulent tenter de monter le plus rapidement possible. Ça va, ça c'est un style. Mais il y a aussi un autre style où est-ce que c'est un peu plus relax et vous voulez essentiellement pouvoir avoir le bon équilibre essentiellement entre votre vie privée et la vie professionnelle. Probablement, il y en a ici sur l'appel qui ont des familles, des jeunes familles. Comment balancer ces choses-là? Je comprends tout à fait. J'ai 4 enfants. Puis la gestion de ces choses-là, peu importe le niveau, ça doit être un des piliers de comment vous gérez. J'ai réussi à pouvoir gérer ces différentes choses-là parce que j'ai pu avoir des conversations honnêtes, peu importe le niveau, même avec le sous-ministre pendant la pandémie, sur qu'est-ce que moi j'avais besoin pour pouvoir performer, pour pouvoir fournir au meilleur que je pouvais. The only other thing that I would say is that if you are feeling overwhelmed and you are in a situation where there's little to no receptivity in terms of the concerns that you've raised, or with the fact that you're putting your hand up and you're saying, look, I am beyond my capacity in terms of what I'm able to produce and produce well. I strongly encourage, and I encourage my staff on a regular basis, the Employee Assistance Program is a huge tool that is underused within the Government of Canada and is so helpful. I've made it all the way up now as Corporate Secretary, Director General, as an EX3, and I can openly say that I've used the Employee Assistance Program on several occasions to talk through with experts and coaches on how to deal with certain situations and to come to terms in terms of, what that would mean for my career and being able to assess and determine next steps. So I think a combination of all those things, you have way more control than you think about a lot of things in your life, in your professional life, in your personal life. Focusing on those things is hyper important. Setting your boundaries, especially as a young professional, is key to making sure that you have a healthy career in front of you.
Yeah, those are all very good points. And also, like, advocating and putting it out there and removing the stigma is a really big part in making sure that people have a more balanced life and they're able to balance their personal and professional requirements. And with that, we can move to the Q&A section.
I'll just mention as well, you really shouldn't be feeling so burnt out. I mean, there's going to be times where, government jobs are kind of up and down, and you'll be very busy and then it could die down. They just literally started to vacuum my building as soon as I speak. That's cool. But you really need to take care of your mental health. And those are really great resources Jimmy pointed out. And I just took some notes while you guys were all talking as well, but I really like that, Frank pointed out, find a niche area of some skills or knowledge that, you can work on the side, where you kind of become the expert for that. And it could be, like Frank said, something that nobody else wants to pick up on, or, you're a policy analyst and there's countless policy analysts on your team. Maybe be like the person that they'll go to for PowerPoints, be like the really, be the person for building decks and they just know you as that person. And those look like niche areas of skills that you kind of also develop on the side, even if you don't really, let's say, don't ever make a deck in your current job. And then, what was I going to say? Jimmy also pointed out those other engagement, whether it's clubs or social settings. You really want to always be willing to learn and just being open, wanting to always kind of have not like a student mindset, but just throughout your career, even if you are in a managerial role, you still want to be wanting to learn. And then just like us, me and Jimmy are in this youth professional network. So that's one avenue that you can join as well. I know a lot of different departments have it as well. We can point out the concerns of new grads or young professionals to TC. And it's a good tool to also meet people from other departments that you would never work with. With that said, I'll go to the Q&A. I know we have around 10 minutes, so maybe let's try to take 2 or 3 questions to start. So our first one, it says, how did you know when it was time to change teams or try something new? What factors do you consider in your decision-making when you're considering opportunities? I'm not sure what each panelist's experience is for this current question, but whoever wants to take the first stab, go ahead.
I think, you know Sometimes it's harder just to confront reality and accept it. But either having been on either side of the issue, meaning whether it's professionally, you're just not getting the same excitement that you used to in terms of advancing different things or doing some of the work that needs to be done. That is typically one side. But I think the more important one is if there is a team issue, an environmental issue, I personally feel as though your career, it's about 20% is about the work, 80% is about the people that you interact with and the team that you're in. If you're not comfortable, if it's a struggle getting up in the morning and getting yourself going and getting into the office or even logging on, I think those are fairly clear signals. You kind of don't want to wait that long though, and you should be, but sometimes it just hits you, right? You've had your head down, you're working on something, and then all of a sudden it hits. But your career is also a journey of learning yourself. And I think that the more you advance in your career, the more you are able to pick up on those little things that you can stop, pause, and go, oh, you know what? This isn't going the right direction. I think I need to do something. I need to look into something. I'm not a big fan of, every 5 years I need to move, or every 3 years. Everybody's different, and all the better. But I think that, picking up on your cues in terms of your well-being, I think are critical.
I think you also have to be open to, sometimes you're not really looking to move either, but there's an opportunity that comes your way. And so if you have those networks, if you're, speaking to friends, if something just comes up, in those instances, what you absolutely want to be sure that you have done is you are enabling yourself in order to be able to move quickly. So if there are professional accreditations that you need to maintain in order to get into a job that you want, you need to make sure that those are up. The other thing que je suggérerais fortement serait de s'assurer que votre profil linguistique est toujours à date. La dernière chose que vous voulez avoir, c'est d'avoir l'emploi de vos rêves et ne serez pas capable de l'accepter parce que tu es en train d'échouer ou tu devrais repasser un examen de langue seconde. So I'll say that again in English. You want to keep your second language profile up. You want to be in a spot that if the job of your dreams arrives, you don't have to worry about having to take a second language exam in order to get there. It adds much more stress than it needs to be on an already stressful exam. Sorry, as an English speaker taking French, I find them very stressful. But that I would think that way you always know that you can react, whether your own internal clock is telling you, okay, it's time, or the universe sends you a sign that there's this amazing opportunity. You're always in a spot where you're not flat-footed in seeking those career development chances.
That's great. And moving to our second question, just for everybody's context, could each panelist tell us where they're speaking from?
I'm currently in Ottawa. I think that I did see a question earlier about kind of regional representation. I haven't done an assignment. I did 5 years in the United States, but other than that, there are different ways of getting kind of regional representation. So a lot of the work I've done is required collaboration with my colleagues out in the regions. And in fact, my stint at the Privy Council was in intergovernmental affairs, so it required looking after and facilitating negotiations or discussions with a few provinces. But a lot of the public services in Ottawa, and but it doesn't mean you have to be here. And there are great opportunities out in the regions as well. It's just I've managed to find a way of getting the different kind of experiences I wanted through Ottawa.
I'm in Ottawa as well, and I've spent my entire career here. But as an interesting aside, which is just a piece of information that you might not know, the actual headquarters for Veterans Affairs is in Charlottetown, PEI. So if you are working in Ottawa, you are a region for Veterans Affairs. And that was a very fascinating experience, I can assure you.
Perfect. I'm also in Ottawa, but Transport Canada has 5 regional offices across the country and has numerous Transport Canada centers across the country as well in different locations within each province. And I believe we also have representation as well in the territories. So coast to coast to coast.
And just to kind of promote Transport Canada, we also have 2 positions abroad. So the one I did in Washington, D.C., and we have a position in London, England. So when I know a lot of people join the public service and are thinking that it's want to go to global affairs because of the idea of being abroad, a lot of departments, including transport, many of our colleagues may work in Canada, but work extensively with their international counterparts, a lot in the United States, but a lot elsewhere, because standards that are developed, often we rely on each other and try to collaborate in terms of the kinds of standards and security and everything else that we do together. We're safer and more secure and better if we're working with like-minded persons around the world.
Thank you, everyone. And just for context as well, I know there's the teleworking rule for all different departments, but you're also able to have arrangements with your managers as well. You know, I worked from Calgary myself for 2 years when I first started, with the promise that I would move. But if you're applying for jobs right now and it says you need to be located in the NCR, still apply and see what options there is. See if you can come to an arrangement as well, as long as, you know, if you're going to the local office in a different region, that could be an option as well. But don't pull yourself out of a competition thinking that's going to be the results. Just apply to anything that comes up, and then you never know. My team right now, there's the jobs are based in NCR, but I have colleagues that are working from different regions temporarily for these arrangements. So I'll take the next question as well while we're here. So this might be the last one because it's 2:27 right now, but it says, any advice for networking and getting your name out there so you open up doors to different departments or agencies? Should you let the work speak for itself, keep up your reputation, etc.? I'll quickly just mention, I would say, like, don't network naturally, like build relationships on a personal level, and don't, you know, go into it just like your purpose of networking. Don't just think about like just for a job, because those relationships will last you way longer. And without even intending to network as well, you'll notice you'll really start to meet a lot of people just in your first job as well. But I'll open up the floor for that question if other panelists want to answer.
It's visibility. I mean, I might be slightly old school, but you know, having visibility and you know, participating in different meetings and trying to get yourself into, you know, one thing that you could explore is as part of your learning plans, as part of your EPM or your PMA exercise, you know, putting in that you would love to shadow a different level of manager to be able to see what he or she does on a daily basis and maybe participate in some of those meetings. That those are easy ways of being able to gain some, you know, behind the scenes access and being able to determine that. But there's other, you know, more formal things, like I believe there's a Mega Connects, I think it's called, in November, which is a huge opportunity for the Federal Youth Network and very senior members of the government to mingle and go to somewhere and basically have a drink and a chat and connect that way. Those are valuable things. But even just minor things like you know, the National Public Service Week, there was an award ceremony here, being present in person and being able to speak to some of your colleagues and learning who they are. Soon it'll be the GCWCC campaign. There's going to be a multitude of events that are going to be organized that will be hybrid, and for sure you can participate virtually, but getting there and being able to have those side conversations with certain people and exploring, I think those are some of those organic manners that you can really broaden your network.
And I can hear every introvert in the audience having a collective heart attack by that. Sorry. So
indeed.
Sorry. So just as Norman said, I mean, everything Jimmy said is correct, but as Norman said, it has to be natural for you. So you'll find as you're going through your career that you'll find the networking leverage point that is comfortable for you. And once you're comfortable, then that also has resilience and legitimacy and authenticity as well. So I just wanted to assure the introverts in the audience that it's okay.
I agree, because it doesn't have to be, you don't have to think about like a huge networking event. Like I would just chat with Paula like on the side on Teams, and like we just developed a conversation. Like we never worked together, but it was just like those side chats. You can network in so many different settings. Frank, if you want to add anything.
Nothing to add to my colleagues. They covered it.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for everybody attending. I know there's lots of other questions in the chat, but I know the Federal Youth Network organizes so many of events like this, so there's going to be opportunities to ask those questions again. And also, I'm sure a lot of those questions transfer to other departments as well. So attend the other departmental showcases. I think they're they're throughout the summer. I know that for sure. So ask your questions to other team leads or other representatives from other departments, and I'm sure you'll receive really great responses. I'm not sure how we're concluding this. So it's 2:30. Laquan, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I want to thank you so much to the panelists, especially the hosts, for great insights and for hosting a great session. And thank you to the audience as well for joining us today. We have one last survey that we're going to share with you right now. And the results won't be shared, so you will have a private survey there. As mentioned, resources are available on a wiki page on GCpedia, and the recording of this event will be available on our YouTube channel shortly. And that's it. Bonne fête de journée. Merci.
Thanks, everyone.